Telerik UI for ASP.NET Core is a library that keeps growing. More and more components are being added all the time. In this chapter, we're going to take a look at some more components that we'd like to highlight, whether it's because they're new or just very popular. You can check back here at a later time to see if more component lessons have been added.
Well, we've seen a lot of components in this course so far, and I'm sure we're going to see some more. But for now, let's take a look at the dashboard page where we've arranged these components in a pretty static way. However, this being a dashboard lends itself to a personalization. This is where users can rearrange the different elements of a dashboard to suit their needs. There's a layout component that's provided with Telerik UI. That's actually perfect for us to use in this case because it's going to allow us to resize and reorganize some of these elements that we see on the dashboard page. If we take a look at the demos page, we can scroll down to the section called layout, and then you can see tile layout is right here. Let's take a look at that. Just as it happens, the demo contains a dashboard. Would you look at that? So you can see the interaction here that you can deliver to your application by being able to drag, drop, and resize these different elements on the dashboard. And that's what the tile layout will allow us to do. Make sure you check out the source here to see how this tile layout has been implemented. And we are going to do that as well in our dashboard right now. So let's head back to the code and we're going to open up pages, open up the dashboard, and we need to locate the areas or the elements, visual elements that we want to separate into their own tiles. But before we do that, let's go ahead and define the tile layout itself. So we're going to find a spot right over here is good. And in this case, we're going to use the Kendo HTML helper called tile layout. Just like any other component, we need to provide a name. So I'm just going to simply call it tile layout. Now we are going to need to specify the columns and the rows for this tile layout. And because we have 4 elements spanning the horizontal area that indicates all issues, I'm going to provide 4 columns for us to use. And those are going to be the divisions that you can drag and drop different tiles in between. And after the columns, we're going to need to define containers. Another word for container is tiles. So the add function for the configurator will add a tile, and then we can configure each tile using the Fluent API. So for example, I'm going to add a header, which will give me a configurator for the header itself. So I'm going to configure the header now. There's a few things I can configure with the header. You can configure a template. I'll show you how to use templates momentarily, but I'm just going to use text because that would be really simple, and we'll use templates for the actual tiles. So the text of this first tile will be active. These are the active issues. So now that the header is configured, we're going to keep configuring that first tile. We need to indicate where the template can be found in this document. And I'm going to use an in-body template. I'll show you how to define those in a minute. But we need to specify the ID that we're going to use for this particular tile. And the ID I want to use here will be TMPL. This can be any name you want here, but I'm going to keep a consistent nomenclature for all these templates. TMPL active issues. That's what I'll call this one. Okay, I'm going to terminate that for now, and I'll show you that we're not quite done configuring that tile yet. We're going to need to specify the columns and the rows, but for now, I want to go ahead and configure or set up this template for us to use. This is the active tile template. All right, so back in the code, we have all these different sections we want to put into tiles. We have the chart. We have this section with the issue close rate. Then we have issue count open, issue count closed, issue count active. All these are going to get their own tiles that you can resize and drag. Now, we were using the Bootstrap grid layout system before, but we don't need that anymore because we're going to be using tiles now. And we also don't need the card styling because tiles will provide their own styling. So let's go back here and I'm going to close this div up. We're not going to modify anything in the filters. And I'm going to start pulling things out into this area right here, starting with the active issues. Now, we need to define the HTML that's going to provide the template for the tile that we're going to use for active issues. And the way we define these templates is using a script tag. Now, a script tag has an ID, and this is the ID that needs to match the ID that we provided for the body template ID in the tile definition below. So we used TMPL active issues. This name right here must match the name you provide in the tile layout right here. That's the body template ID. In fact, I'm going to copy that and paste that here just to make sure. And it looks like I did have it wrong, so I'm glad I did the copy and paste. Now, this is not just a regular script tag because the browser will assume that that's going to be executable JavaScript. We need to provide a type here. This is not going to be executable JavaScript, but it's going to be of type text/x-kendo-template. You can see the Visual Studio is trying to help me with some of the other types that are available for a script tag, but Kendo template is not one of the ones on the list. So make sure you use that one and then close the script tag. Anything inside here is going to be not rendered by the browser and not executed by the browser, but it'll instead provide the template for our tile component to use. And what I'm going to put in there is this. This is my active issues information that was rendered previously. I'm just going to grab this and move it into the template, just like that. Let's format it a little bit. Now, this has some bootstrap styling in it on this div. We no longer need that. I will keep the active issues class because that provides some of the colors, but all these other classes are not necessary and I can remove them. Those are bootstrap classes. Now, if we run this and take a look, you will see that we still have the old layout and the static content, but down here where we specified the tile layout, we now have a new area for the tile layout, and we have one tile in there. That's this card. It has a header of active. That's the text we defined, and it's rendering our active issues. Great. So we have one down, 4 more to go. Let's close this out. And what I'm going to do is quickly create a few more of these templates for each of the tiles we need. The other ones we're going to need are closed issues. Let's copy that. We're going to have open issues. We're going to have close rate. And finally, we need to have a chart. And now I'm just going to go through the process of moving all these to their appropriate template spots up here. There's closed issues. And again, I don't need the bootstrap classes. Let's grab open issues. I'm going to keep the text danger and open issues classes because that's going to give it the coloring. And let's grab this close rate HTML. We'll put that in here. And finally, we come to the chart. Now, the chart is actually a Telerik UI component. So this one is going to be a little bit different. We're going to copy the contents here of the component and put it in the template. However, you might have noticed that when you indicate the template type is text x Kendo UI template, whatever is inside the template no longer gives you IntelliSense or even syntax highlighting in Visual Studio, at least not at the time of this recording. One way you can get around that is if you do need to alter something here in the component and you want the syntax highlighting and you want the IntelliSense, you can change this type temporarily to text/HTML, and then you get that back. And we're going to need to do that because we're going to need to add an attribute right here in order for this chart to render inside of the tile layout. Great. So we've moved everything over. We have all this extra HTML that we just don't need anymore. Let's delete it. And now we need to finish defining all these tiles. So I'm going to go to the configurator here and copy this a few more times. We have a total of 5 tiles we need to define. And each one of them is going to have a different header title. So we're going to have closed, we're going to have open, we're going to have close rate, and finally our chart is going to be in the last tile, and we call that one all. We also need to specify the template IDs for each one of these. So temple closed issues, temple open issues, temple close rate. You can see why I've used my own standard for this so that I can remember how to call these and I'm not chasing and copying and pasting these all the time. And temple chart for that last one. Now, before we continue, let's run this and see what it looks like. There are going to be some issues and I'll show you how to address them momentarily. So the first issue you see is that the chart is just not there. We also don't have the ability to resize or drag these tiles around. So let's fix all that. Now, starting with the chart. The reason that this Kendo chart doesn't work is because of the rendering priority of these components. If you're going to be using a chart or a grid or another complex component inside of the tile layout, because it's inside of a template, you need to specify that this component is going to be used inside a template. And we do that by adding an attribute is incline template equals true. Now, if we run this again, we'll see that, wait a minute, we don't have the chart again. Well, what's going on here? And we also have some errors in the console. Well, there's one more thing we need to do with our chart in order for this to work. And this has to do with placing the chart inside of a template. There are some attribute values that interfere with the way the templating engine works. So for example, here you see the color is indicated as double quote and then a hex value with a pound sign. Well, this combination of characters doesn't work well inside the template. So instead of indicating it the color like this, we're going to remove the double quotes and we're going to use \\/ to escape the hash. We're going to do the same thing for this color as well. Now, when we run the project, you'll see that our chart does get rendered down here. But why is it so small? Well, by default, we didn't specify that these tiles have to be a certain size and take up a certain number of columns or rows. So that's what we need to do. Let's go back to our tile declarations. And we're going to call a couple of methods here. One is call span. So for each of the top ones, it's going to take up one column. And of course, there's also the sibling property row span. We're going to have these take up one row. I'm going to copy and paste these to the top 4 tiles. And our chart is also going to get a call span and row span, but instead of one call, we're going to give it 4 columns. Now, we also want the tiles to be reorderable and resizable, and that's very easy to do by adding reorderable, setting that to true, and also resizable and setting that to true. Let's take a look. And here we go. Now you can drag and drop tiles wherever you want, and you also have the chart at the bottom that you can drag around as well, and you can resize this to whatever size you want, and you can fit a different number of tiles on each row based on the size. Now, you might have also noticed that when we first refresh this page, even though the last tile takes up 4 columns, the chart inside does not expand to 4 columns. And that has to do with the eventing system and when each event gets fired. This chart gets rendered and then the tile system gets rendered. So we need to resize this chart programmatically after the rendering of the tile layout is finished. And also whenever we resize the tiles, we want the chart to resize along with that. And we're going to use the client-side API to do that. First thing we're going to do is add an event to our tile layout. We want to listen for any time we resize any of the tiles. We want to provide an event configurator and provide a resize function to call. You can also provide a reorder function if you'd like. We're just going to use resize here, and we're going to call the function onTileResize. This is the function we need to define in our JavaScript code. Let's go down here to where we have our JavaScript code. It's in the section called scripts. Right down here, I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to call it onTileResize. And this is the function that's going to be called whenever any tile is resized. So it gets a parameter, the event, and that event is going to have a container. The container is going to be that particular div or that particular tile that is being resized. There's a couple ways that we can trigger resizing. One way is to use the Kendo global function that lives on the page, and it's provided by the library. If you call Kendo resize, it's going to call the resize method on all the different components, Kendo components that support resizing. So if we pass in e.container into that along with true, this will trigger resizing on all the components at the same time. Let me show you what that looks like. So here's the page, and if we take a look to the chart area, you'll notice that the chart is still a small size. We'll handle that in a moment. But if I resize this, the chart will become the size of the tile. This is what we're looking for on resize. So that works pretty well. However, when you first load the page, that's still an issue. We need to handle that separately. Now, because we only have one component that we need to resize here, and that's the chart, we're going to have a separate function that handles that. So we're going to call it resize chart, and this is going to take in the chart ID, just a generic function. I'm going to use the client-side API that Telerik UI provides by passing in the chart ID into the jQuery object and then fetching its data attribute to pull out the actual Kendo chart instance. And we can store it in a variable called chart. Now this chart instance has its own resize method that we can call. So now instead of using the global Kendo resize function, we can just call resize chart and pass in the ID of the chart. Well, what's the ID of the chart? Remember the name attributes that we specify in all our components? Well, these become client-side IDs. So in our case, we only have one chart here and we called it chart. That's the ID that we'll pass in. So let's go back down here and pass in chart. Now we still have the issue where the chart doesn't occupy the full horizontal space when the page loads. And for that, we're going to listen to the document ready event. Whenever the document is ready, we're also going to call our resize chart function. So I'm going to copy that and paste it right here. Now, if we run this, there's going to be an issue. And I'll show you how to solve this if you ever run into it in your own applications. If you take a look at the chart now, you'll still see that it's still the same size. Now, the reason for that is because we are defining this document ready handler inside of the scripts section. And the script section is defined in our layout in the head of the document. So what we can do is actually bring this handler outside of the script section down here. Now, this script will be executed after the rendering of the chart. So in other words, the chart will already be ready to go when this code is executed. Whereas if it was in the head of the document, the chart wouldn't be ready yet. And of course, there's one thing that I forgot. When you're fetching jQuery objects by ID, you need to include a hash sign right before them. So there we go. Let's run this and test it out. Now our chart is taking up the full width of the page and our resize function still works. So if you want to move this chart up here, you're welcome to do that. Thanks to the tile layout, you can design your visualizations and your dashboards however you see fit.
In this lesson, I'd like to review with you one more component, and it's a pretty popular one. It's the upload component. The Telerik UI for ASP.NET Core upload component abstracts away some of the upload headaches that you often have to deal with when doing client-side upload of files. However, it's not a trivial component to implement, as it requires client-side configuration along with server-side implementation to make everything work. So let's take a look at how to set this up. And always refer to the documentation and the demos because they're quite helpful here, especially in this case. To find upload documentation, you can go to the documentation site and then find editors, and then you'll find upload down here. Here you'll see an example of the upload component being implemented. Here it is in use, and there's the source code of a more than trivial example. So let's take a look at what's implemented here. Well, we have the file selection, and this allows for multiple files. So I'm going to select, let's say this JPEG I have. And this one is set to upload manually, not automatically. You can see that right here. It says auto upload is false. And we can select multiple files, like even the same file multiple times. Now here, when you click upload, it goes through and uploads those files to its destination, and that's it. Now you also can specify which files are allowed and which ones are not. Right now this was a JPEG file, and if I clear this out and remove JPEG from the list of files that are allowed, then when I select a JPEG file, I get a validation message that says file type not allowed. We'll also set up allowed file types in our example. We're going to go to the code and implement this, and I want to show you where we're going to add the upload component. Right on the details page, on the details tab, we have this form already here, and we're just going to add one more field here for uploading attachments. Let's close this out and go to the code, open up pages, and then backlog, and then open up details CSHTML. This is the underscore details CSHTML, which contains our form. This is different than the details page. This is the entire page that the form lives on, which we will need for the code behind because that's where we're going to handle the server-side part of the upload. But the actual component that we're going to define is going to live in this underscore details CSHTML file. So let's go down to where we have the form and the form fields. And right over here is our save button. So right before the save button, I'm going to create another form group for the upload component. And what I'm going to do is just copy this assignee field and paste it here. But instead of having the assignee and a drop down here, I'm going to implement a Kendo upload component. So I'm going to delete that. For the label, I'm just going to say attachments, and I'll type in attachments here as well. Now, I'm going to use an HTML helper here. You can use the tag helper, but in this case, I'm going to use the HTML helper. And that would be HTML Kendo, and we want to use upload here. Now, of course, as usual, let's give our component a name. And this name is very important. This name is going to be the parameter that we pass to the handler that we're going to implement. And I'll review that when we do that. We can also add a multiple field here, whether we allow multiple files or not. So I'll say true. And then we're going to need to specify how our uploads are handled. So this is done with the async call, and we need to use the configurator to set that up. So here we need to specify the save URL, and this is going to be the handler. We're going to point to where we're going to handle this upload, and we'll do that momentarily on the server side. So I want to go to details model and add a URL parameter here for the handler, which is going to be upload. One other option we can specify here is whether we want to automatically start uploading or manually upload with a button. And I want this to happen automatically for this demo. Finally, we can also add validation here. And this is what I was talking about for the file types. So we're going to have validation, and we can specify the allowed extensions. This will take in a new string array, and we can specify what strings we want to allow. I do want to allow JPEG files, and I also want to allow PNG files. And by the way, these will match exact file extensions. So if you do have a JPEG file with the E, that needs to be specified separately as well. Now, sometimes files are larger than the server will allow, so we need to specify the maximum file size we want to allow as well. And we can provide the client-side check for that file size. So we still use the validation extension method for that, and then specify the max file size. I'm going to give it quite a large size here. So this is the client-side implementation. Let's take a look at what that looks like. I'm going to go to backlog, select an item, and you can see here that we have attachments. We can either drop files to upload or select files. And there's our JPEG file, which I can select now. However, this tries to post back to the code behind, and we don't want to do that. We have another destination for where we want this to be handled. So right now we don't have this implemented, this upload handler. And we do that in the details page. This is the containing Razor page, and we go to the details code behind. Let's find a place where we can add an upload handler, and right after the constructor is fine, we'll add a public method here. We want to call it upload to match that name we provided as the handler. So this upload must match this upload right here. You can also name it save, and then you need to rename this one to save. I'm going to leave it as upload so it's clear what we're doing here. And because I allow multiple files to be uploaded, I'm going to receive an enumerable of iForm file. And this is where the parameter needs to match the name that we provided in the upload. So I call this files, and in the upload specification, the name of it is files. So this needs to match. If this is named file, it doesn't match files as the parameter and it won't work. So this needs to match. Now, what do we do with these files? Well, first thing we probably want to do is check to make sure that files is not null. Just a little bit of verification there. And then we want to go through each of the files. Then I'm going to paste some code in here to speed things up. Here, we're going to get the file content from the file object. And then some browsers send the name of the files with the full path. So we're going to do a little trimming here to clean up the file name. And now I want to get the physical path of where the file is going to end up. So I want to create a folder here where I'm going to store my files. And I'm going to do this in the www root directory. You can map other directories, but this one is really easy for demo purposes. Let's create a new folder here. And I'm going to call this folder uploads. Now, how do I get a hold of this uploads folder in my code? Well, I need to let my code behind know about my web root path. So let's add a private variable here. I'm going to paste that in. And this is going to be the iWebHost environment, which is coming from Microsoft ASP.NET Core hosting namespace. And I'm going to call it web host environment. And this is going to be automatically injected into our constructor of this details model. So all I need to do is add this to the constructor, and this will automatically be detected and injected there. Now all I need to do is just set the local web host environment to the one coming into the constructor. Let's specify that we want this .webhost environment, so there's no complaints. Okay, now in order to get a hold of this uploads folder, we can do that right here in our upload handler. And our web host environment has a web root path property on it, which is the www root folder. So we just need to combine that path. And here we can hard code uploads. This will be the path of our uploads folder. So we'll call that uploads. And now for each file in the collection, we want to get the physical path of that file. We're going to combine the uploads path with the file name to get the full path of the file. And finally, we're going to use a file stream to save that file there. Now, this is just a demo. Don't do it this way because you're probably going to want to have a little bit more of a robust solution in a real application of how you save files and how you store them. You're probably going to save a path in a database somewhere. This is just an example. Finally, we want to return something from this method, and we're going to return an empty string just to signify success here. Great. So let's run this solution and see how that works. Let's go to backlog. Let's go to an item here, and here we'll see attachments, select files. I'm going to select our Silverlight VWeb JPEG file and click open. And you'll see that files were uploaded successfully. Now I'll just minimize this for a second, and you'll see that uploads has that file in there. I'll put a breakpoint here in our handler just to show you how that works. And we're going to select the files again. And as it's uploading asynchronously, you can walk through the code and see what's happening on the server side. And now we have 2 files uploaded. So all this client-side functionality is handled for you, which is pretty nice. Now, because this is an asynchronous upload, you also want to give your users an option, an opportunity to remove those files if they've accidentally selected the wrong one. And you can do that using a remove handler. So let's head back here to the docs, and we've implemented our handler in the Razor page. So you can take a look at the Razor page documentation under upload. And here you'll see an example of this being implemented with a save URL, which is what we did, and also a remove URL. The remove URL can also be another method in the handler, which will then delete the file from your uploads folder instead of saving it there. So that's the ASP.NET Core upload component from Telerik UI.